Not so long ago, a few years back, in fact, say 20, 25 years, Neanderthals were considered still a brutish, a uncultured, dead-end ancestor of ours. Since then, the more we studied them, the more sophisticated techniques to study them, we've discovered many, many new things about them. Through genetics, through actual excavations, through restudying bones and artifacts, re-evaluating sites, we have found that they are comparable to us. They are, in fact, a cousin species, a race of humans. And they were very, very sophisticated. They were intelligent. They were capable. They survived in a place on Earth, which was Europe in their time, that were possibly one of the harshest environments you can think of. It was very, very cold in winter. It could be cold in summer and dry, and they evolved and they developed and specialized in their environment until around 40,000 years ago they vanished. Now, we've known that our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, and Neanderthals, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, have had mated on more than one occasion, because we have our species have moved into what is now Europe on more than one occasion. The first one, I've already mentioned it some time ago, was around 200,000 years ago, and we know that from our DNA. Another time was around when we met Neanderthals, and we moved into what is now Eastern Europe, where Eastern Europe and Western Asia meet. What is possibly now Armenia, Russia, the Western Asia, and those areas around 100,000 years ago. But these two first contacts, as we can call them, left no continuation in the descendants. We don't know what happened to them. Were they absorbed? Did they die out? We don't really know. One clue is from a study that was recent study, which I'm going to share in a minute, and it involves the DNA that we inherited from Neanderthals may explain why the first two movements into the areas inhabited by Neanderthals, which from Africa, which is Western Asia and Europe, even as far as Central Asia, they only succeeded in this last movement, and it involves some genes that we inherited from them that protected us from diseases. I've already talked about in another video I made on this subject, but this is refining somewhat what I talked about in the video that I made beforehand. I will share. And it seems that the modern humans may have been wiped out by the flu, for example, if they had not mated with Neanderthals, as this study shows. Scientists from Stanford University have discovered that the ancient Triassics led to the swapping of important DNA which protected humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, because Neanderthals are humans, after they left Africa from diseases. Neanderthals became extinct around 40,000 years ago. Yeah, more or less, yeah. But most modern Europeans still carry about 2% of the DNA in their genomes, between 2 or 4%, depending on the scale you use. I've mentioned that before. And researchers have found that 152 genes we inherited from Neanderthals interact with modern-day influenza A. Influenza A is one of them. I think is the deadliest influenza stripe of virus, of the flu virus you can get. Spanish flu, which wiped out 20 million people worldwide in 1919, was influenza type A, and also hepatitis C, and helped our ancestors fend off diseases when they encountered them. Yes, but then that would mean it is our ancestors which admixed with the Neanderthals, because our own clean non-Neanderthalic DNA would have made us vulnerable, as is the case when, for example, when Europeans first went into the Americas, the local inhabitants did not have the defenses to fight off any of the European diseases. The European, I mean, when I say European, I mean old world diseases, because from Africa and from Asia and Europe, we were constantly being bombarded by new stripes of a new disease like the pest, smallpox, dysentery, or those sort of things, just to name a few. So it may have been the same case with us. Our research shows that a substantial number of frequently occurring Neanderthal DNA snippets have adapted from a very cool reason, said Dr. Dmitry Petrov, an evolutionary biologist at Stanford School of Humanities and Sciences. Neanderthals' genes likely gave us some protection against viruses that our ancestors encountered as they left Africa. Yes, obviously. Yes, they would have had that sort of vaccine type response, and after we mated with them, the descendants from the mating would have carried those defensive genes, not the actual people themselves. If we just mated with them and did not produce any offspring, for example, it would not have provided us with that type of protection. So, when the first contact occurred between the two species, Neanderthals had been living outside of Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. Well, this is a little bit misleading, but yeah, just so you guys know, this is from the Telegraph, and one of my, I think I used this avatar beforehand. I think I still do. Yeah, I think it's him. And this is a little bit wrong, but it is a newspaper article. I have the actual studies, etc., in the description, as I always do. So this is just a quick way of talking about it. Neanderthals evolved from Heidelbergensis, Homo heidelbergensis, or Antecessor, which we also evolved from Antecessor. New data shows that our Homo sapiens sapiens, or archaic Homo sapiens in Africa, evolved, has started more or less becoming us. We becoming that would lead to us about 500,000 years ago. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Northwestern Asia, Siberia, etc., that area, just below the glacial areas, around 450,000 years ago, just round numbers, from DNA. Actual physical evidence, it's somewhat earlier. Our oldest example fossils are 300,000, more or less, from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and Neanderthals from 450,000 years, more or less, in Burgos, Atapuerca in Spain. They seem to be the oldest actual physical manifestations, examples that we have. So, it says here that they've been living and they have time to evolve. But our newly immigrated ancestors, by comparison, would have been much more vulnerable. Well, this phrase here, this sentence here, doesn't really tell the picture, because I've already shown in videos, and I've already provided data and studies, etc., that we had various quote unquote migrations. Let's call them movements. Let's call them migration, just for simplifying the matter. And 200,000, around 100,000 years ago, we're beginning from Mount Carmel in Israel, from newly discovered evidence from Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. And from yeah, so around the 100,000 year mark, our species was moving out of Africa and into the new quote unquote new old world, Western Asia and Eurasia, more or less. So they would have come in contact with Neanderthals in their displacement, and they would have been also come in contact with these new diseases. Maybe that explains why the first two quote unquote waves did not succeed, even though they managed to transmit genetic material to Neanderthals. And we know that because some of the genetic materials that we reacquired them in this last movement of peoples. So yeah, yes and no. That explains one thing. So when the first contact, when the from the study, scientists compiled a list of more than 4,500 genes in modern humans that are known to interact some way in viruses. They then checked the list against database sequenced Neanderthal DNA and identified 152 fragments of those genes from modern humans that were also present in Neanderthals. It is made much more sense that for modern humans who borrowed the already adapted genetic defense of Neanderthals rather than waiting for their own adaptive mutations to develop. Some diseases you develop natural mutations if you survive them. So then you can pass on them to their to your offsprings or not. For example, influenza you can't, but some diseases like the pox is smallpox, they still affect you. But I'm sure that the earliest manifestations would have really wiped populations out. But that is, this is a field which I'm not an expert on, so I don't know. I'll take their evidence as authoritative. It made my right. Developed, said David Enard, a former postdoctoral fellow in Petrov's lab. Modern humans and Neanderthals are clearly are so clearly related that there really isn't much of a genetic barrier for these viruses to jump. Of course, they are races of humans, that's the real word means. They are subspecies of Homo sapiens. It is they mated and produced viable, fertile offspring. More in the case of a sapiens to a Neanderthal sapien male to a Neanderthal female than a Neanderthal male to a sapiens female. There's something with the Y chromosome that does not in the Neanderthals that does not translate to mating with to get viable offspring. So, but I've talked about that before. So yes, the study has been published in the journal Cell. It is in the description if you want to read it. So next article which I'm going to talk about, sort of a little bit towards this, a bit linked to this, still on Neanderthals, and it has to do with Neanderthal healthcare practices, which are crucial to survival. Yes, they are, of course. And again, this is some new research which suggests that Neanderthals embraced healthcare practices such as assisting in cases of serious injury and challenges of childbirth. I've already talked about that the Neanderthals had empathy and they treated the infirm and the sick. There's evidence of that from at least 75,000 years ago in a cave in Iran, Iraq, Shukul, if I'm not mistaken. School, that's the one. No, Shanida, that's the one. Sorry about that. I'll get confused with the names. I'm not very good at names, but I'm very good at scientific names. But as you guys know, where there was a Neanderthal which had suffered a very serious injury when he was a youngster. He lost the use of an arm. He became blind on one side. He lost on his mandible was also injured, so he had to be taken care of. I've talked about him before in one of my videos, so you go. So this research, the healthcare practices in this period of human evolution are so often studied along complex cultural behavior, mostly based on research into rituals and symbols associated with death. Yeah, the Neanderthals buried their dead. We know that. The new study, however, sets out for the first time that healthcare could have had more strategic role in Neanderthal survival, which is a very good thing to highlight, because anything that maximizes your possibility of survival is a good strategy to take. And so the previous research at the university already suggests that compassion and caring for the injured and dying could have been a factor for the development of healthcare practices. Yes, they could. But further investigation has shown that there was an evolutionary drivers behind it. Which again, yes, of course, there's just confirmation of possibly what many a logical conclusion would be. Researchers investigated skeletal remains of more than 30 individuals where minor and serious injuries were evident, but did not lead to the loss of death. These samples displayed several episodes of injury and recovery, suggesting Neanderthals must have had a well-developed system of care in order to survive. This is interesting because the hunting method that we think we know about Neanderthals, which is not the same as our species, was that they ran. Basically, they didn't throw spears or didn't throw their weapons. They possibly would have used fire to stampede animals down off cliffs. We know that there's evidence for that, but there's also a way that many of the animals that may have fallen cliffs, they wouldn't have been completely killed or injured, or they would have lashed out at the humans, Neanderthals, that were hunting them, and then they could have inflicted serious or injuries into the hunters. And there's evidence that we know from many sites that especially from these that the injuries were hunting related. It doesn't say here, but I've read from other studies. And the Dr. Penny Spickens of the University of York's Department of Archaeology said Neanderthals may have faced multiple threats to their lives, particularly from large and dangerous animals. But in popular culture, here we go, have such a brutish and strong image that they weren't really thought too deeply about their vulnerability before now. Yes, we are changing our perception of these, of our cousins, of our fellow humans. We have evidence of healthcare dating back to 1.6 million years ago, and that would be the Homo erectus and Homo antecessor, but mostly Homo erectus. And then we think they would probably go further back before this. Well, yes, until when we find evidence, it is evidence, it's fact. I just do hope that they do find evidence. It would be really, really exciting. So we wanted to investigate whether healthcare in Neanderthal was more than a cultural practice. Was it something they just did, or was it something more fundamental for their strategies of survival? Well, I would answer that, and I haven't read fully the study. I have also linked in the description. But if the hunters do not recover from any of the injuries, they cannot hunt. Therefore, you cannot get food. Yes, the females, the infirm, gathered and provided, and it's a statistic fact that they provide the gatherers component up to 60% of the nutrition value of the tribe, the band, the food acquiring practices, but meat in itself is a powerhouse. It is the turbocharging of your energy needs. Small games, yes, but small game are more hit and miss, where if you can manage to get down one or two big animals, you could dry the meat and have meat for a while, much more readily available than the hit and miss practice of hunting small game. Remember, in hunting strategies before modern weapons or etc. were invented, it's only even in the most prolific hunters of other animals, the felines, the cats, or the dogs, etc., or any other the predator animals, it's only 10%. 10% of the time that they hunt, these how much they is the percentage that they actually capture their prey. So it's very hit and miss. The Neanderthal humans, even from Erectus's time, 1.6, 1.8 million years to 2 million years ago, they would have increased that percentage higher to nearly 40%, 50%, 40% at least, 30%. I don't know the actual figures. I'm just speculating. So they're not what I'm saying, 30 to 40% chance of hunting of a successful hunt is not accurate. It's just my guess. But it was an improvement, and it became even more the more we evolved until we began to domesticate. But that's another animals, and that's another story. So, the high level of injuries and recovery from serious conditions such as a broken leg suggests that others must have collaborated in the care and help not only to ease the pain but to fight for their survival in such a way that they could regain health and actively participate in the group again. Yes, that is correct. That would lead to a highly successful for the not just not the band, but the species not becoming extinct. You need a strategy for survival. The more you maximize survival, the more that species survives. Sorry about that doubling of things. So it is generally accepted that more than 80% of the skeletal remains known to archaeologists display several injuries. So yes, some of which have required simple remedies such as food and rest, and others would have required some serious level of care due to their high risk to life. For example, cuts, infections from cuts, broken bones. If they have to be set, they have to be immobilized. There's a whole lot of involvement in curing injuries. Even today, we can see what happens to us today. Imagine if we didn't have hospitals, and they don't have hospitals. And so yes, and Neanderthals lived in small groups, bands. So did humans until agriculture, etc. When I say humans, I mean us. Until agriculture was invented, and a little bit time after. So the loss of one life was particularly significant to the survival of the whole community. Yes, it was. It could lead to the death of that group, that band. Other diseases. Injury community. Injury over disease was the most common threat, as Neanderthals didn't live the type of environment or in a large enough communities for the risk of some pathogens. But there were enough pathogens around. The flu, for example, as I mentioned in the article before, and many diseases that are endemic to Eurasia. We've known that they were around that time. So many, not all, some. I think it's better description. Neanderthal women, however, were at risk from difficulties in childbirth. The shape of their pelvis and the size and shape of the child's head were similar to that of modern humans. So it is assumed that they would have also have encountered some common issues in childbirth. Yes, and the shape of Neanderthals and ours are the max. I think they're the maximum evolutionary size you could get for our brain size. Because other than that, the female pelvis would become so weak, and I think I'd need an anatomist to describe this better. But yes, they would have had the same issues as we have, because they were comparable in our head size, at least. Different shape, but the same capacity. Dr. Spicken said that it is likely they would have had assisted childbirth, obviously, and the role that we now attribute to midwives would have been the other females of the band. Without support, they probably would not have survived the toll of death rate of mothers and babies would have taken the hold of their communities, their bands. Obviously, they needed a way to minimize the risk of death through birthing. So when we look at these daily risks and dangers involving hunting and finding food, as well as childbirth in respects to the small hunting communities, same problem we had until our species, our human sapiens, us, had until we basically invented modern medicine, the childbirth situation. And even still, modern medicine hasn't completely eliminated these incidents of the baby or the mother passing away. So, yes. So we can see that the healthcare is a pattern of evolutionary significance, collaborative behavior alongside hunting together, food sharing and parenting. This is what provided healthcare to those in needs today, such as an important part of human life. They display the exact same behavior as we did. It is another more proof that they are our evolutionary cousins, or a race of humans. Okay, last article comes from Morocco. It is not Neanderthal this time. It is us, sapiens. There is they found in Morocco a single bone knife, which is the oldest stone, not just tool, but the oldest bone tool associated to a culture in North Africa called the Archaeology culture. This bone is as you can see the picture here, it's a knife. And the single bone artifact found in Morocco is the oldest, well-dated, specialized bone tool manufactured by the Archaeology culture of the Middle Stone Age. Reveals a new study. I think I've provided the study. If not, click on this link and you guys can get to the actual study. So according to the survey conducted by Abdel Jalil Bouzogar, the Institut National des Sciences de l'Archéologie et du Patrimoine in Morocco, and Sylvia Bello, Louis Humphreys, Simon Parfit, the National History Museum in London, colleagues showed that North Africa has a unique technological complex. This complex was retrieved in 2012, around 260 miles inland from the Atlantic coast. It's dated to 90,000 years old, and it is manufactured in a different way other than other sub-Saharan artifacts. Now, this is interesting because this culture was more or less contemporary with the Mousturian Neanderthal culture in Europe. And I provided the WikiLeaks page explaining what this Archaeology culture is. It seems to be that it is a successor to the Mousturian culture in Africa, but I think it's wrong because Mousturian culture is primarily an Neanderthal invention, and Neanderthals were primarily Eurasian hominins. So I hope to get clarification on this assertion, but after all, it is a newspaper. It comes from English yabiledi.com, so it's a Moroccan newspaper, and I will hope to get better clarification. Translation could have been wrong, but yeah, I think, I don't know, but I think this could be the actual oldest bone tool that we know of. I haven't seen any older tools made of bone from anywhere. I'll also keep my eye out for anything new, but yeah, the Archaeans were capable of complex and controlled sequences of actions involved in manufacture of specialized bone knives. Well, of course, because bone is easier to work than stone. It's much more easier, and you would need I think you would need slightly less specializations to from make a blown knife than you would need a stone knife, and I know that from experience because to this bone came from a rib of some mammal. Don't know what animal it is, but um, to shape a bone implement, you just have to rub it against something that grinds it, and you get it there. Whereas producing an actual stone tool, it is much more complex planning, execution, because if you mishit something on a stone tool, because they were made from very crystalline and very brittle materials like flint and quartzite and other and chert, for example. And if you hit them wrong, they shatter. They don't break; they shatter. They can shatter. They can shatter like glass. So, so yeah, I'm looking forward to much more um, much more studies, articles on this. It also says here that the finds insight in development of human cognition. Um, Terrans made specialized bones earlier than originally believed, and more than 40,000 years before the Neanderthals. Well, that have been preserved, I will add to this conclusion, because in Morocco, very dry, arid environment leads to preservation of bone material more readily than in Europe, where it's much more moist, humid. Have you got those? I hope everyone got that. Never mind. That's more humid and where bacteria can dissolve bones easily. And also in Europe, there's a lot of granitic areas where granite is acid, so any acid environment dissolves bones. So yeah, in Europe, it is almost a miracle, quote unquote, that any bone implements survive because of the environment it's located to. And that concludes these three articles which I wanted the news for this week. I'm going to see if anyone has any questions. If has any questions, let's see what anyone says. Hello, everyone, by the way. Yep, no new people. Okay, starting from the top. I hope there was a lot of trolling in the chat. I love to read it afterwards when I'm at work. So. Oh, don't worry, John. I watch your videos absolutely. Or I don't get shocked. After all, I do look at what Suit Yourself posts on Twitter. That'll destroy anyone's stomach. So I'm immune to anything. Nothing. Basically nothing. Watching your videos, but I'm talking about watching your videos, John. Nothing shocks me, you know. Let's see. No, any questions? Oh, John, yes. If Homo does get my channel demonetized, that's why I completely turned off monetization. I don't care anymore. So yes, it did. I can't say Homo because it's a slur somehow. Our species' scientific name is a slur, and not just our species, the whole Homo species, hominids. So yeah, erectus. Yes, I know that joke. So if anyone has any question, please. I need to change my contact lenses, and I'm having trouble reading. But if anyone, here you go. Yes, Modwayne, bone knives are it's hard to flake them. You can do using flint to basically do what we do to modern today, just scrape them and to the shape, and then file them onto some sandstone or something that's coarse type sandstone thing to shape them further. Yes, absolutely. We don't chip stone bone tools, we chip stone tools, not bone. Yes. um, well, you still need to, you can't uh, um, it were alternative. It was a shaped bone knife, not flake. It was from a rib where they got a portion of the rib, and then either by scraping using a scraper or actually rubbing the bone onto a rough surface, like I said, um, you can basically shape a bone, not just bone, but uh, ivory. You can flake. You can work it almost like it was wood, if you see what I mean. Ivory is different, but bone itself, because it's a calcium carbonate type material. Um, if you try to flake it, it breaks because of its crystalline for thing. But yes, let's see the teach. Malefice. That's evidence. I can't disprove that. One sec, one sec. Even the dates are correct, so I can't disprove that. No, Malefice. Nope. Uh, yeah, I think you also deserve the wrench alternative. There is a way that you can work stone bone tools. Do you know how you do that? You dunk them in water for some time. No, wrong. That's ivory again. Bone you can't, but ivory, to make them easier to work with, you dunk them in water, preferably an alkaline type water, because alkaline softens up. I think it softens up the um, the organic material. I'm not too sure, but then after that, or you can heat it up in water, like cook it in steam. That would provide it a more malleable um, to um, to work with. But ivory, but bone, as I said, rib bone, it has a lot of cartilage in it, so it's much easier to work in that sense. Leg bone, you can split it to provide a working surface, and it's been done with a lot of other of animal bones. We've seen that before. More recent, because as I said, in Europe and in Eurasia, the bone does not survive as well as in arid areas. So yes. Okay. Yes, it is Malefice, exactly. Okay, I think I'm ending it here. 38 past. I went a little bit over the half hour. I try to keep these at least to half an hour, but I think it was worth it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, these three news articles. Whenever I talk about Neanderthals, I love Neanderthals, as you guys know, uh, and because they have been had a bum rap. Also, I have some earlier hominins articles as well, and the more research comes out, the better it is for me, because I can talk about them. So until next time, guys, thank you for joining, and I hope you all have a nice Monday. And those that are in the southern hemisphere, in over there in Australia, Australasia area, a good night and a nice Tuesday. So see you next time. Bye bye, everyone.